Glassmorphism is a relatively new UI trend, and it looks pretty cool. In this video, we're going to build this cool credit card that looks like frosted glass, and it's actually a fillable form with simple validation. For the validation, we're going to use a JavaScript library called Cleave.js. If you find this video helpful, like and subscribe. Let's get straight into it. So I've got a project here with an index.html, main.js, and style.css, and then some images. Now all of the code and resources will be on GitHub, and the link is in the description below. So in the body, we're going to create a div with the class of card, and within that, a form. The form's not going to have an action, it's not going to actually do anything. Within the form, we'll have an h1 with the class of card title. And within that h1, we'll say enter payment info. All right, after that h1, we are going to use emit, and we're going to create a card row, column, labels, and inputs. So we're going to do all of that in one line. We're going to say card row, and then within the card row, we're going to want a card column. Within that, we're going to create a label with the class of card label. And that is going to have a for attribute that is going to be equal to card number. And then after that, we're going to have an input with the class of card input and the class of card input large. This is going to be for the card number, so we want that to be the larger input. It's also going to have a class of card number, and then we're going to go back up and we're going to create another card column. And it's going to also have a card chip class. We're going to add an image to that a little bit later on, chip. And within that, we'll have our image. All right, so now we're going to hit enter, and it's going to create all of this for us all in one shot. All right, so now we just have to go through and add a few extra things. So in our label, this is going to be the card number. And then I can tab over to text, that's fine. And then the source for our image. So that is going to be in our image directory, and the source is going to be chip. And that is an SVG. And then we'll go over to our alt, and we're going to just say chip. Let's just save this to get some formatting, and we're going to see some ugliness over here on our preview. Now, the only thing that I do want to add to this input is a placeholder. So let's add the placeholder, and it's going to be xxx dash xxxx dash xxxx. Some indication as to what we want entered into this field. Now I'm using Emmet here to write all of this HTML so quickly. Emmet is a built-in feature of VS Code, and if you want to learn more about that, check out my VS Code Superhero course at vscodehero.com. Okay, so after this row, we're going to add another row. So we'll go right here, go below this, and we're going to use one more Emmet string. We're going to say card row. And within that, this time we're going to group it because we're going to want two groups. So it's going to be two groups of card columns. We're grouping them because they're exactly the same. So label, it's going to have a class of card label and an input alongside it with the class of card input. And we want two of those, so times two. And then after that, we want another card column with the class of card brand. So we're going to display which credit card brand it is, whether it's Visa, MasterCard, and then within that, we're going to create an I with an ID of card brand. All right, and so the I is going to be for an icon, and we're going to actually be using Font Awesome for that, so we'll add that in a little bit later. So this first label is going to be for our expiry date. So it's going to have an ID of card expiry, and we'll label that expiry date. Let's save this just to get some formatting here. All right, so we'll just need to add that ID here. So it's going to be an ID of card expiry. And we're also going to add a placeholder here, and that is going to be XX/XX. So this is going to accept the month and year. Now the next label is going to be for our CCV. So we'll say card CCV, and let's label that CCV. The input, again, needs the ID. So that was card CCV. And we're going to put a placeholder in here as well, XXX. And that should be it for our HTML. So let's go back up to the top here. We do need to add our styles. So I'm going to add a style sheet link for our CSS. And I'm also going to paste in a link to Font Awesome. So this is just the CDN link. And now let's get started on our styling, because right now it looks pretty terrible. All right, let's go over to our CSS. And the first thing that we're going to do is import a font. So it's going to be Poppins from Google Fonts. And then we're going to do some basic resets. We're going to set our margin to 0. And our padding is going to be 0. We're going to set the box sizing to border box. And set our font family to Poppins. And then we'll set a fallback of sans serif. All right, after that, we'll target our body. And we're going to make the height 100 VH. And then we're going to display as flex. And then we're going to justify our content center and align items center. And we're going to set a background. We're going to set the background to purple as a fallback, but we're going to use a picture. So that's going to be URL. And that is in our image directory, and then bg.svg. And then we want to have this centered and cover. And lastly, we're going to set an overflow of hidden. So let's save that. And that still looks pretty bad because of this chip here. So let's go ahead and style that chip first just to get it out of the way. So we're going to say card chip, and then the image within that. We're going to set the width to 3 rem. Let's save that. Okay, so now we can at least see what we're working with. All right, let's start with our card. So part of this effect involves setting a background on the container, as well as setting a blur. So let's start with the background. So we'll say background. We're going to use a linear gradient. So we're going to say to bottom right, and then the RGBA, which is going to be 255, 255, 255, and 0.2. So that's going to be what it's going to go from. And it's going to go from that to RGBA, 255, 255, 255, and 0.05. So let's save that. Now you can see a very slight background behind it. The next thing we're going to add to this is a box shadow. So we'll say box shadow. It's going to be 0, 1 rem, 2 rem, and RGBA of 0, 0, 0, and 0.5. Now you can see it a little bit better. And the next part is the blur. So we add that by adding a backdrop filter and blur. And we're going to set this to 0.8 rem. Now you can see this cool frosted glass effect. All right, let's add some padding. We'll do 1.5 rem. All right, we're also going to add a border radius. We'll do 1 rem. Give it a little bit of curve there. And we're going to add a couple more shadows. I want a little bit of a highlight on this top left and the bottom right. So we're going to do that by adding 2 more box shadows. So we're going to say -1 pix, -1, and 2 pixel spread of AAA, and a 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 2 pixel spread of 555. All right, we'll save that. And now you can just barely see a little highlight here on the top left and a little bit of a dark light on the bottom right. So if I open this up a bit, you can see that a little bit better. All right, let's move on to the card row. Card row, and that is going to be display of flex. We're going to justify the content space between, and we're going to set a padding on the bottom of 2 rem. Save that. Okay, it's still not going to look very good. Let's keep going. Next, we'll work on the card title. We're going to set the font weight on this to 600. Font size is going to be 2.5 rem. We're going to change the color here. It's kind of a purpley color. We're going to give it a margin of 1 rem on the top, 0 rem on the left and right, and 1.5 rem on the bottom. And then we're going to add a text shadow. So for text, instead of box shadow, we use text shadow. It's going to be 0 on the x-axis, 2 pixels on the vertical y-axis, 2 pixels spread, and RGBA of 0, 0, and 0.3. All right, gives it a little bit of a shadow there on that title. All right, next up, we're going to go to the card column. And the only thing we're going to do in here is we're going to add some padding on the right of 2 rem. And that's just going to add a little bit of a separation, especially for these two inputs that are on the bottom. All right, now let's work on the inputs. So card input, we're going to set the background to none, and we're going to change the border to none as well. Get rid of all of these default backgrounds and borders. We're going to set a border on the bottom though, and it's going to be dashed 0.2 rem and RGBA 0.15. We're going to set the font size to 1.2 rem. We'll set the color to white. And we're going to also add a text shadow on this. 0, 2 pixels, 2 pixels. RGBA 0, 0, 0, and 0.3. Save that. All right, we're getting somewhere. Looking a little bit better. All right, so we have this card input, and then we also have the card input large. So let's work on that one. So card input large, and we just want to change the font size on this to 2 rem. All right, makes that credit card input here a little bit larger. Now, when we focus on it, you can see we still have this outline, so we want to get rid of that. So let's go to card input and then focus. And we're going to change that to outline none. And we're also going to set the border color. So we need to, since we're taking away this accessibility feature, we need to add some way of indicating that the input has been focused. So instead of that outline, we're going to change the border color, make it more white so that it's apparent that that input is active. So we'll say border color RGBA, and then we'll make it 0.6. Okay, so now when we focus on an input, we can see this line gets whiter, and we know that we've focused it. All right, so now let's target our placeholders. So we'll say card input, and then placeholder. And we're going to set the color on these to an RGBA value. And we're also going to set the text shadow to none. We don't want the shadow on the placeholder, only if we're typing in. Let's see, that's a little light. Let's see, at 0.5, not 0.5. There we go, that's much better. After that, let's target our labels. So that was card label. We're going to display these as block. We're going to set the color to white. We're going to give it a text shadow and a font weight of 400. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, the only thing I don't like this chip is right here. I want it to be a little bit lower. So right here, we're going to say card chip. And since it's within a flex box, we can say align self to flex end. All right, we'll save that and see now that it's a little bit lower. It's more in the middle. Now this is looking really good. Let's just expand this a little bit more. Now, when I refresh the page, I want this to kind of animate up. So let's add an animation. So at the very bottom here, We're going to add some keyframes. We're going to call this card enter. And then we're going to say from, we're going to set the transform and the translate Y to 100 VH. So that's going to make it go all the way down past the bottom of the browser window. And we're going to initially set the opacity to 0.1, right? And then it's going to go to transform and then translate Y 0, which is its default position. And opacity should go back to 1. Okay, so then we need to apply this animation. So we're going to go up to our card. So it's right here, and we'll add it at the bottom, and we'll say animation. So we're going to set it to 1 second. I'm going to add a custom cubic Bezier, and I'll show you where I got this from in just a second. And then we'll give it the name of the animation, which was card enter. All right, let's save that. And now when we refresh, we get this nice little animation. So I got this, this cubic Bezier from easings.net. So these are just a few standard animations. And I think I used Ease Out Expo. So if we click on it, it actually gives you the cubic Bezier here. And so I just copied it from here. All right, so now we need to work on the form validation. So when I type in here, I don't want to be able to type letters. And when I type a credit card number, I want it to automatically add those dashes in for me. Same thing for the expiry date and for the CCV. So to do that, we're going to use this JavaScript library called Cleave.js. And so here, there's an example. So if I start typing in a credit card, it adds spaces automatically. We're going to customize this to add dashes. It can also do phone number formatting, date formatting, time formatting, and so on. So let's go back to our HTML and we need to import some JavaScript. So right before the ending body tag, I'm going to paste in the CDN for Cleave.js. Then I'm also going to add in a script tag for our main.js. All right, I'm going to save that. And now we'll go to our main.js. First, we'll create a const called Cleave, and we'll call it CC for credit card. So that's going to equal a new Cleave, and we give it the ID. So it was card number. That's the ID of the input. So now it's going to attach to that input. And then we can set some parameters. So we're going to say credit card. We're going to set that to true. We're going to give it a delimiter. And that's going to be a dash. So we want it to add dashes between the numbers. And then we have an on credit card type change. And this is a function that gives us a type. For now, we'll just console log the type. And all of these options are outlined in the Cleave.js documentation. So let's save that. And we'll go back over here and let's open up our console, F12. So now as I start typing in here, it's going to automatically format. And it's also going to tell us what type of credit card this is. So if we go back to Cleave.js, scroll down here, let me just zoom in a bit, probably hard to see. So American Express starts with a 3.4 or a 3.7. Diners Club starts with 300, JCB 35, and so on. So it can tell us which ones of these has been typed in. So what I want it to do is, as we're typing it in, I want it to display the logo or the icon of the type of card that it is, Visa, MasterCard, etc. And we're going to do that using Font Awesome. So we need to define all of these different types first. So let's create a const. And first we'll call it card brand. We're going to get our element where we want the icon to go. So document.getElement by ID. And we called that card brand. We're also going to create Visa. And that's going to equal the classes that we want to add to the card brand element. All right, so in Font Awesome, the classes to create a Visa logo are FAB and then FACC Visa. All right, and then I'm just going to take this and we're going to duplicate that down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Okay, so then I'm going to change Visa to MasterCard. And then this one is Amex. The next one is Diners. And actually this is, let's see, Amex, Diners-Club. And then JCB. And the last one is Discover. Okay, so we've created all of these definitions. And now we're going to use a switch in order to set the appropriate class on our element. So we'll say switch. We're going to pass it our type. And then we'll say case. So if it is Visa, then we're going to set our card brand dot set attribute. We want to set our class to Visa and then break. All right, so then we're going to take this and let's copy that down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Visa will now be MasterCard. And then this one, I think it was Amex. The next one is Diners. The next one is JCB. And the last one is Discover. Okay, and then, of course, at the end of that, we also need a default. So default, so if it's none of these, then that means the type is not defined. So in that case, we want to remove the class from that element. So we'll say card brand dot set attribute class, and it's just going to equal blank. And then we're going to break. All right, so let's go back over here and give it a try. So let's type in for, there we go. We have our Visa logo. It's not styled yet, so it looks pretty ugly. If we go back, I think it was 300 for JCB, 54 MasterCard. Okay, so let's style this now because that looks pretty ugly. We'll go back to our CSS, and then right before animation, let's add it right here. So we're going to say card brand. We're going to set our font size to 3 rem. Since Font Awesome is actually a font and not an image, this will actually work. So we'll save that. That's already looking pretty good. We're also going to set our color. We'll change that to white. We're going to set a minimum width of 100 pixels and a minimum height of 75 pixels. The reason that we're doing this is because some of these brands are different sizes, and as they change, it's going to mess with the height of our card, and I don't want it to mess with the height of the card. All right, we're going to set the text align to right, and we're also going to give it a text shadow. All right, so now if we go back in here, change it, there's Visa. That's Diners or JCB, I'm not sure. Okay, Discover is 6011. There we go. There's Discover. All right, so now we need to work on our expiry date and our CCV. So back in our JavaScript, we're going to add a couple more things here. So we're going to add another const. We'll call this Cleave date. And that's going to equal a new Cleave. And the ID on that input was card expiry. And then we're going to pass it some parameters. So we'll say date of true. So this is a date, and our date pattern is going to be an array. We want our month and our year. Okay, so now that should work. So now it doesn't allow me to type any letters. And when I start typing a date, that's all it will allow. All right, so the last part is our CCV. So we'll create a const. We'll call it Cleave CCV. That's going to equal new Cleave. And the ID was card CCV. And so here we're going to say blocks and pass it an array and say 3. So this allows us to only input 3 characters. Now, if I wanted separate groups of characters, so let's say I wanted 3 characters and 4 characters and 3 characters, that will group the characters into a set of 3, 4, and 3. For this instance, we just want one group of 3, and that's it. Okay, so now if I go to CCV and I type in, that's all it will allow is 3 characters. All right, I hope this video was helpful. Like this video to help me out and subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this.